G'day Internet, welcome back to another video and back to my Microbee. It's been a little while since we've seen this on the channel. I think last time I was building the GoTech for it. Now, in that video, I mentioned one of the biggest Achilles heels of the Microbee is the keyboard. The switches that were used in the keyboard were, let's just say, cheap. And they have not stood the test of time. But Ewan from Microbee has come to the rescue, and I have an entire replacement keyboard for it. Now, unlike a lot of 80s microcomputers, where replacing the keyboard is essentially remove top cover, unplug keyboard, maybe undo some screws, swap the whole thing over, this one is quite a lot more complicated, as you will discover as we get into it. This is not going to be a short process, so let's get stuck in. All right, job number one is to tear down the Microbee as much as basically I can. So we have 6 screws on the bottom. Right, top cover's actually in 2 parts, so the back bit can come off as well as the front bit. Now, this here is the modern top board that I think they call it the core board that I mentioned before. This is a story for a whole nother day, but if you're at all curious, essentially what Ewan did was kind of jam all the original electronics up one end and then implement an FPGA to do some fancy things, as well as emulate a disk drive on an SD card. There's also a network port back here. So yeah, that's what the top board is about, and it's got a row of pin headers here and a row of pin headers here and an earth lead. And this is a very careful removal process. So undo those. Undo the earth, and that's our top board out. Next we have 2 screws either side of the keyboard, and I think that's it. I don't think there's anything else holding it in. There isn't. Right. Oh, and at this point I also want to desolder the speaker. Next, let's remove some keycaps. Next up is the bit that I have been dreading, and that's that every one of these key switches, plus a couple of rectifiers, need to be desoldered before any of this can be removed. So all of this needs to be desoldering. The question is, how many times will my desoldering gun jam during this process? Put your bets down in the comments. Now, normally speaking, these keyboard metal frames are actually held in by some rivets. This one doesn't seem to be like that, which is nice because I would have been drilling the rivets out. So these have all, in theory, now been desoldered. In theory, this should actually lift straight off. In practice, I guarantee you it doesn't, because there'll be tiny little bits of solder still holding it in. So I'm gonna have a go at trying to find all those little bits of solder, otherwise I'll be pulling out each individual key switch. All right, I've gone through every one of these solder points and given them a wiggle. There was probably about a dozen that needed another going over. Let's see how loose we are. Got to be pretty close. Still something holding it together. I'd really like to avoid having to unclip every single one of these. Whoop. Ah. Right. We're free. Go away. The original board is now pretty much done. It's now time to turn our attention to the replacement keyboard. I did need to remove these key switches because we're reusing this frame. Well done. Mind you, this is a million times easier to do now than it would have been in the computer because you can push from behind. Now, I'm not going to actually throw these switches out because some of them, or actually on this particular one, I would say the majority are still, well, at least serviceable. So I will stash them away for either my other Microbee or someone else's. Right, the last thing we need to do this frame is the original regulators are actually pop riveted in, so I just need to drill out these rivets. We're replacing these, so damaging it really doesn't matter that much. And that's both the old regulators out. Now we can finally turn our attention to the new one. So job number one is to install the new regulators. There's one here and one at the other end. They simply go in like that. I guess they need to sit proud a bit to clear the capacitor that's there, but nothing's a little bit of blue tack won't help me with. So next up is some mechanical supports. Now these are just single like header pins. There's 13 of them and they all kind of go around the board like that. So I've got 13 of those to now solder in, bring on the blue tack, because they're gonna have to get done individually and kept dead straight, which should be fun. Okay, that's all the little pins. There's like 4 here, 1 up here, some more down here, and some more down here. This gets put to one side. The next bit's actually quite interesting. There's another PCB, which isn't, it's basically just being used as a bit of plastic. And it actually screws down onto the original metal plane, and that's because these holes are actually bigger than they need to be. So Ewan has used basically a bit of PCB to make them the right size, and there's 4 screws that go in. That's actually kind of nifty. I like that. So these just go in like that, and then there is a nut on the other side. It's at this point our young adventurer is about to make a horrible mistake. But how long will it take for him to realise? And yeah, so there's 1, there's 2, 3, and 4, so I'll get the rest of those put in. Now we actually get to kind of one of the fun parts. Here is a bag of switches. Dun, 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 dun. And we get to pop these into the frame. Which way do they go? All right, so they've got to go with the pins vertically. Oh, they probably don't go in any other way. Right. Da, 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 da. Right, before we keep going, it's probably worthwhile taking a quick look at the old switch versus the new switch. So this is the old switch here. Ewan tells me it's a Gelco JKS91, and these are actually custom-made switches, which mechanical ball and spring. I'm reading this from my phone, by the way. Mechanical ball and spring arrangement made by Kawanda Industrial Manufacturing in China. The primary difference is, well, they're slightly different heights for starters. This one has a bit of a cross-section plunger, while this is just straight but does still work with the keycaps. But the primary difference is the completely different footprint of the actual pins. These ones are orientated right to one side, and these ones are in the center. Hence the need for the main PCB adapter board thing. I'm telling you this because I know someone in the comments will ask. Look, it's starting to look like a keyboard. So next, according to the instructions, and yes, I have just simply been following the instructions this whole time, this PCB here should now simply slot down over, it might take a bit of wiggling, over all the key pins. Why? Okay, so I've got one out of place here because you don't actually fill all the gaps. And we seem to be on. Okay. If only he'd noticed. Key switches can now be soldered in, but the instructions do say to make sure that everything is sitting correctly, and I'm looking down here and it seems to be, all the key switches seem to be working. So, time for a whole lot of soldering. Alright, so what have I put in that shouldn't have been put in? Why do I have no reset key? The reset key's here. Why do I think I've done this whole thing backwards? And it was at this point he discovered his massive mistake. That top locating PCB, yeah, it went in upside down. There is going to be absolutely no way of... I think this is meant to be that way. No, because it sits over these. All these are going to have to come back out. Right, well, after fixing that massive fuck up, all the key switches are in and the back panel is on again. All right, the very last thing to do is there's a 20-way pin header and it needs to go into there on the original main board, and that's how the new keyboard talks to the computer. All right, that's possibly one of my least favorite things I've ever had to do, is to line up all those extra pins we put in plus the 20-way header, but I think I've got it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the top board back on and we can give it a test. Okay, booted into the self-test and I should be able to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, blah, blah. No, I'm missing like 3 rows of keys. Okay, reseated it all, and I think I've got keyboard. 7, 8, 9, 10, blah, 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 blah. That's backspace. Did I hit insert? Huh. Good. Thank Christ for that. All right, I'm going to button this thing back up and let's make sure that it is actually working in programs and stuff like that. And there we go, it is all back together. One quick correction, I was using the self-test wrong. It's actually, you need to put in the key that it's prompting for you. So escape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, etc., etc. And so yes, confirmed again that all the keys work. I even managed to find my proper little Microbee monitor. This is the monitor that most kids would have had at school. I know at my primary school, most of the entire lab was made up of ROM-based Microbees because there was basically 2 versions. There was one that was purely ROM-based and the others were disk drive-based. And in the lab, most of the machines were ROM-based and talked back to the teacher's computer, which had a disk drive and all the rest of it. And then there was also one special machine which had disk drives and a color monitor. Now those color monitors are now absolutely as rare as hen's teeth. And so, yeah, but most of the computers would have had this monitor or the green version of it. Ignore the OS2 box. Although I have actually found a good modern use for OS2. You can leave a comment down below on that. But what it does mean is now with a proper working keyboard, I can play my favorite Microbee, which is Scavenger, which is, well, it's Boulder Dash. Now, you've got to remember, at its heart, the Microbee is actually a CPM machine. I can even actually boot into the little menu to change whatever disk image is in there. And if I change disk A to, what did I call it? 128 mast, I think. .dsk. Which is like a normal system boot disk. And there we go. This is Microbee's standard little intro menu. But I can simply drop to a DOS prompt. And it's CPM. So for all the CPM fans out there, whenever you're told that a CPM machine can't do graphics and games and things like that, you can point them to the Microbee, because quite clearly this is a CPM machine and quite capable of doing a half decent game with graphics and sound. And after many, many years, my Microbee now has a fully functional keyboard again. As a quick side note, the last video this was in, where I was getting the disk drive ready for a show, that I didn't actually end up taking the Microbee because of the keyboard, so therefore no one could use it, you couldn't really do anything with it, blah, 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 blah. We've actually got another show coming up at the end of April, and so this will be nice and ready to go. Now, I do have to apologise if I seem to have gotten a little grumpy towards the end of this process. Look, at the end of the day, one of the number one things I really don't enjoy working on with vintage computers are their keyboards. It's a me thing. For me, it's a case of it tends to be a very monotonous job, but also has a high risk of going very much sideways when you're talking about, you know, anywhere between 50 and 100 switches that could possibly go wrong. But because of the monotony, I have a bad habit of losing concentration and making silly mistakes like I did in this video. Thank God it was recoverable. The only thing really left to do on this Microbee is I am having some video issues. I'm going to have to do some research on that. The Microbee actually puts out a digital TTL color signal. This is currently just running on composite. But I'm having all kinds of issues with the vertical sync out of this machine. It works on one 1084 monitor that I've got, but the image kind of bobs like this, which is really annoying. And on any other of my CGA monitors, it's just a scrolling mess. So that's a future problem that I need to look into. But for now, this here is looking fantastic, and this is probably how I will display it at the show that's coming up. But for now, that will pretty much do it. If you liked the video, click like, subscribe, all the usual YouTube-y stuff. I am getting close to 10,000 subscribers. That'd be nice. But as always, a massive shout out to my patrons who are scrolling up the screen as I speak. And if you'd like to help out the channel, there is a link in the description. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.